Thank you for joining me for another Quick Hits conversation. I'm Dr. Robyn. With me today, I have Bruce Wayne, Lisa Peluso, and Jim Barrood. And I want to ask the question, what makes something courageous? Jim, can you kick us off?
Sure. I think being courageous means being vulnerable, putting yourself out there and having empathy in what you do next.
I would agree with that. I think when we think of courageous, we think about moving through fear and doing something, even though we know there are great risks. But I think Jim's right. The biggest form of courage is doing something morally right, even though it may not be the easiest path, or doing something that is kind rather than making ourselves look good. And so oftentimes this requires being very vulnerable. I think about courage also as sort of taking a step forward that normally society wouldn't expect you to do, and not selfishly, but selflessly. For example, if you're on a call or in a meeting and there's a lot of tension and people would expect you to just kind of maintain this stoic attitude and move through it, to just pause and say, hey team, something's not right here. Let's take a break and discuss it.
Interesting.
Yeah, for me, the courage, when I read this, the idea of Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. I took it to the extreme, I guess, in a way, but it's fighting for something that frightens you, to overcome. I like what Jim said about vulnerability. I think that's a core aspect of courage, to overcome whatever it is, wherever you are. It doesn't matter what spectrum of behavior you're at. If you're at a very low level of behavior, but if you're fearful of it and you overcome it, then courage is there. Because
so does that mean, is it not courageous then if you're at a really high level and something doesn't scare you or you don't feel vulnerable, but other people are impressed?
Oh yeah,
by
I think there's definitely a variability. Yes, absolutely. There's and because I, as a neuroscientist, I went back and I started thinking about it. Well, what's happening today in schools, you have some kids protesting because they have to wear a mask, and they go to school and they get kicked out of school because they don't wear masks. And then now there's children leaving school to protest that they want more people to wear masks. So you have these kids are protesting in two different ways. And you think, okay, well, one is courageous because they lose the opportunity to educate. The other one is courageous in that they want more protection, something that frightens them. And neurophysiologically, they're reacting very similarly, even though they're opposites, polar opposites. So that was the paradox I thought of.
So then what makes it courageous? And I want to hear definitely from Lisa and Jim about this too. Is it courageous because someone else says so, or is it courageous because I feel fear and move through it?
It should be both, frankly, right? Internally, right? Existentially, and then from the audience or your team or your company should view it also as courageous. But sometimes you can't have it, both ways.
Yeah, and I might argue that it's more courageous. I don't know if there are levels of courage, but it would be more courageous to put the collective before the self, because it's easy. Our animalistic instinct is to protect the self. But if you're doing something for the greater good, or you're taking the high road, or you're doing something for the betterment of society or for the whole, that takes a lot of courage. You're not just protecting yourself, but everybody else with your actions.
I think sometimes it takes courage to protect yourself. Sometimes it takes courage to say, I matter and I get to be okay here. I think that takes courage sometimes too. So again, we're on both sides of the coin.
Yeah, it operates on two levels. It operates on the societal or community level, but it also operates individually. Because if you have even though we would, the community would not think your action is courageous, if the neurophysiology that you have to muster to make that action, okay, is then it's courageous in that sense for you. Because
Interesting. Yeah.
neurophysiologically, you have to get over that hump.
Okay.
This is true. But then I have a question. So
Uh-huh.
what's the difference between courageous and just sort of foolish? And I'll give you an example. I did the drop out of college my senior year and fly to Tokyo with $400 in my pocket trick. And everyone says, wow, had so much courage. You just went. But in retrospect, I just wasn't really thinking it through. And I kind of got lucky. And I think that can sometimes happen too. We just see something as fun or good or best for self, but it's not necessarily courageous.
So you look at that event as foolish now?
Absolutely. This was before cell phones, before internet, email.
But it all worked out.
Yes, but I'm not sure it was courage. I think it was a little bit short-sighted.
I've often said there's a fine line between bravery and stupidity.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it is the two sides of the coin. You know.
So then how do we, as now grown adults who in theory are able to think things through better than run off Tokyo at the last second, how do you decide, okay, I'm going to be courageous? Or is it something that you just do in the moment and then realize in retrospect, oh, I was brave in that moment?
Perhaps genuine courage is deliberate. It is thoughtful, and it's knowing the risks, or at least knowing there are some risks, even if you may not know what they all are, and moving through it with that bravery and that intention.
It can be internal too, like you're courageous to get chemotherapy and fight your cancer. There's courage in that, right? It's internal courage. Other people may think, look at you and think of you as courageous because you're still going to work and you're happy and you're trying to be a positive person in the face of all this danger and literally pain. It's a paradox, and it all depends. I looked up all these. I started with the Patrick Henry, then I looked up all these other quotations. I have this book, Bartlett's book of quotations. So I started looking up liberty and courage, and all the way back to I've got one here from Thucydides in 400 BC, and he's talking about Athens. And remember that this greatness was won by men with courage. To love Athens, so that idea of courage and fighting for something that's morally right is very old.
And do you think it must be a human condition, right? Other
yes, because you can only do it if there's future and past. If you have a cognitive ability, because it's rage, right? Courage. Rage is one of energy and putting energy forth to overcome.
Jim, you've been really quiet. I'd love to hear what's going on in your head.
No, I agree with everything that's been said, and everyone's been really articulate today. So I didn't feel I need to add anything. Clearly, courage is something that's internal and considered externally too. And sometimes it's after the fact, as I think everyone has mentioned. You don't realize how courageous you are or someone else is until after the action is done. And
I've had
running into a fire, right? That's the classic, right? Or rescuing someone. You don't think of the danger. If you have that mentality, you do it, and then later you go, whoa, man! Sort of like what Lisa said. Why did I go to Tokyo? But it all worked out. So it's.
I've had situations where
go ahead.
I've had situations where people have said to me, "Oh, that was so courageous. You had so much courage. You were so brave." And I thought I didn't really have a choice. Like it was that or no other that. It was that. That was my option. And so I think it's interesting when other people label something courageous when I feel like there was no choice.
I think the courage in the movement to help those that are not as privileged is palpable right now in our society. And I think that comes with vulnerability, saying, I'm not going to put myself first. I'm going to put others first.
Well, thank you so much. That is our 10 minutes. So I'm going to cut us off there. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.